Hi everyone, this is Nils Davis, Product Manager and author of the Secret Product Manager Handbook. Thanks for joining me today for this video. The video this time gives you a quick overview of an online course I'm creating on writing for product managers, or more generally, communication skills for product managers. In the video I talk about why it's so important for us to improve our communication skills, and I give you several techniques that you can apply today to get yourself further down the road to communication mastery. If you'd like to get on the announcement list for this course when it comes out, there's a link in the notes below. If you have additional questions on writing techniques or anything else, leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you right away. And if you're interested in the book, The Secret Product Manager Handbook, which is all the secrets I wish someone had told me about product management when I started, there's a link below in the notes as well. Let's start by talking about why a writing lab for product managers is important. We are the locus, the central point of a lot of communication within an organization, right? We communicate a lot to customers, to sales and marketing, to engineering, to the executive team, and all of that, or much of that, is in writing or in things that are based on writing. It might be also PowerPoints. And so in the course, just a sort of sidebar, I'm also going to be covering things like how to make your PowerPoints more effective, or how to be more effective at presenting, because that's a big part of our communication as well. But anyway, so we have to do all this stuff, and a lot of what we do, as I say, is in writing. We write user stories for the developers to build features from. We write often white papers. We might write the first versions of competitive hit sheets. We sometimes have to do a lot of product marketing writing, data sheets or the first drafts of data sheets. And all kinds of things like that. So there's a ton of different kinds of writing we do, and so if we can get better at that, we're going to be more effective. And what are some of the benefits? Well, if we do a better job of writing the user stories or feature specifications, and I've talked about that with my valuable framework and things like that, we will end up with fewer mistakes in the sense of fewer features that don't solve problems. If we are good at writing and articulating customer stories and how our product solves customer problems, we're probably going to end up with faster sales. Always a good thing. If our stories are better that we give to the developers, our functional specs, the developers are going to be more motivated, which means that not only will they create better quality stuff, most likely, they'll also probably do it faster. That's the reasons you want your team to be motivated. You'll have happier customers because they'll be getting solutions that are better for them. And you, as a result, may end up with more promotions. You will end up with more responsibility. You will end up with more time to innovate and less time spent firefighting and solving little problems for different reasons. One is by being a better communicator, you may actually prevent fires. I'm going through some of that stuff right now at my current job, where there's a lot of opportunity for improvement in communication. And if we were to get better at communication, I think that some of the challenges that are coming up on a daily basis might damp down a little bit, and we could spend more time on innovation. And that's in the company that I'm working with right now. The other side of this, in terms of the writing and why we need a writing lab, that sounds like something you do if you're a creative writer. Well, product management is really a very creative process. It's also not just about techniques or form in product management, right? It's about certain skills and things like that. So I've given a few examples already about the things we need to write, but things like I've talked about feature specs a number of times, but other things that we need to write, things like video scripts. Writing out a script for a video that gets recorded and edited and things like that, that's really important, and it takes a lot of time. And of course, that's a human voice talking, which means that you have to overcome some problems there. Obviously, data sheets, I mentioned those, at least the first drafts. Competitive hit sheets, we're usually responsible for those. We write questionnaires and surveys where we try to get information from our customers. And if we do a better job of writing those, we're going to get better results back. And things like bug reports, even reporting bugs. I don't know how much experience you've had with that, but a lot of people are terrible at reporting bugs. And it means that the bug is hard to fix, it's hard to understand, it's hard to reproduce. Whereas if you have some basic writing and communication skills, not only can you do a good job of communicating the bug and how to reproduce it, but why it's important and why we need to fix it and what the impact of that bug might be. And those are all things that we are going to be learning to do as we get to be better writers. So if we think about the structure of this course, I'm going to talk about why you need to be a better writer. I've really talked about that. A little bit about being a bad writer, some of those symptoms, some of the characteristics of good writing, and then really the meat of it is how to get started, how to keep going when it's hard to write, and how to write better. So I assume going into this that we're not starting from spelling. I'm hoping that you know basic grammar, which most of us do. We learned that in grade school. And even if English is not your first language, you probably are okay with grammar. And actually, I don't care that much about grammar in this context. Grammar can be fixed much more easily than some of the other stuff. And then, but I'm also assuming that you struggle with writing, because I think we all struggle with writing. It's hard to get started. It's hard to keep going. And it's hard to know what to write. These are all challenges that I have. And so I am hopefully going to be able to help you get beyond some of that stuff. So we're going to talk about why the quality, how to achieve quality, what the process of writing is, how to manage your creativity, because that's another aspect of being a creative person. It can be challenging to manage your creativity. Then I'm going to also share out a bunch of product management templates. Of course, you're familiar already with my spec for features, for how to write a feature spec, the marketing piece, how to do an executive presentation, a webinar for customers, and all those sorts of things. I also have a template for value propositions. So what are some of the things that are symptoms of bad writing? Well, it's hard to follow. It is boring. It's not persuasive. It's not engaging. Often things are long. They're hard to read. Those are all symptoms of things that, if you encountered a piece of writing that was like that, you would probably stop reading it unless you had to do it as your job, and then you would hate it. Good writing can fix all of those things, and it turns out it's not all that hard to figure out how to do that. So some of the goals that help address those issues with bad writing are things like making sure the argument follows a logical structure. Now, I'm really shocked at how many things I read that are logically incorrect, where the structure or the sort of ordering, the temporal ordering of the ideas is wrong. It's backwards oftentimes. And so that's one of the things we'll talk about in this course. I'm going to talk about how to make sure you've got the argument complete when you need to. I'm going to talk a lot about persuasion and how to be more persuasive, how to be not boring. Then, of course, there's the whole aspect of it's hard to write, and so that's not related really to the previous slide, but how to actually get through your creative blocks. And as I said, product management writing, like all writing, or product management is a creative endeavor, and writing is always a creative endeavor. And so you combine those two things, and you end up with things that other creative people are challenged with, like creative blocks, how to get ideas. And then I'm going to also talk a little bit about the product management deliverables per se, the ones that we actually work with, and how to think about those, and how to use them, and when to use them, and things like that. In terms of the set of topics, I'm going to share things like rules of thumb and techniques for getting started and for improving. What to do after you've got your terrible first draft, because one of the techniques is actually to write just a terrible first draft. What the common obstacles are, because one thing that we've learned from human behavior research is that even though you're always going to be facing obstacles, if you are upfront about the obstacles and some ways to get across them, that can often help people make progress on your thing. And then, of course, in this case, it's writing. I'm going to give you a path that you can follow. That's another part of that human behavior thing. Talking about some useful sort of mental models, like the good artists copy, great artists steal. How to start from good examples and how to make use of good examples. I'm going to talk about readability, and I'm going to do a little example with the Hemingway editor. Actually, that's going to come up pretty soon. What are some of the problems that I often see in the mechanics and quality of people writing? So one thing is, as I said, I talked about logic problems, where the ordering of the argument just isn't correct. And that it's surprising to me that happens, but we'll talk about some ways to help address it and how to detect it. A big problem that we have as technical people is we often write in a very academic way, which is actually a really anti-interesting way. In fact, academic writing is designed to be not interesting. which means that that's not what we should be doing as product managers who are trying to sell things. And of course, there's the challenge that people aren't doing it at all. And so that's that big challenge of getting started. So let's talk about a few other specific things. Passive voice. This is one you hear a lot. Don't use the passive voice. Don't use it very much. This isn't a grammar class, and I'm not that great at grammar. I have good grammar, but I don't know what I'm doing. I can't tell you, dangling participles and stuff like that. But the simple heuristic that I use for the passive voice is if there's a form of be in the sentence, then you need to double check. And so, and usually what the passive voice does, it often distances the writer from the thing that happened. So this example sentence of mistakes were made. Okay, that is a very Weasley thing to say, right? So what is much more, and it's a form of, were is a form of be. And so that is an indicator that it's a passive sentence. It is a passive sentence because basically the actor, the person that made the mistakes, is sort of not called out. A much better way of saying this, and one that makes it not sound Weasley, is you say, I made a mistake. No form of be in that sentence. Or you can say, the engineers made a mistake. Well, that's blaming them, but that's fine. If they made the mistake, that may be what you need to say. Or you might say, we found some mistakes, and we're trying to figure out what the root cause of those mistakes was. But saying mistakes were made is a way of basically being Weasley. And that's typically the problem with the passive voice, is it's kind of Weasley. A few more simple rules you can use. Again, this is sort of like that, well, is there a form of be in my sentence? Let's check to see if it's passive and maybe fix it. There's a lot of things, a lot of words that we use in our writing, particularly as technologists, that are just either not correct, or they're unnecessary, they're filler, they're fluff, or they're just more complicated words where you could use simpler words. So in order to is a phrase that you can always leave out of your sentence. I did some action in order to achieve some goal. Well, you can just say, I did some action to achieve a goal. In order to, almost 100% of the time, does not have to be in that sentence. You can almost always cut it out. It has a couple of benefits to do that. It makes a sentence really more clear and more concrete. It also makes it shorter, and shorter is actually almost always good for readability. And it also makes you sound a little bit less of a technologist, a little bit more of a human being. Utilize is another word that you can almost always get rid of and replace with the word use. Or, so let's see, I utilized a pencil to write an essay. Well, I used the pencil to write an essay. And in almost no cases do you have to use the word utilize instead of the word use. And so that's a great one. Reason why is another one. And let me tell you the reason why this is bad. It's because you don't have to say why. You can say, you can either say, let me tell you why this is bad, or let me tell you the reason this is bad. Reason why it's really redundant, is what reason why is. So those are some real simple rules. You can use probably those immediately to go improve your writing today. Just say, oh, if I ever see in order to, if I write that down, just cross it out or remove it. If I ever use utilize, replace it with use. It'll always work. And reason why, I'll remove either reason or why, and the sentence will be just as correct, and you will not annoy people who now are noticing that, as I do when I read stuff. I started talking a little bit about readability and why the taking things out like in order to is good for readability. It turns out people like shorter sentences better than they like longer sentences. They also like short words, so that's why they use instead of utilize. There's a great tool that I really like. It's called Hemingway, which is it's an app for analyzing writing. And so I have a blog post about this, and the screenshots you're going to see are actually taken from that. I took an existing piece of my own hard-to-read writing from my blog from several years ago, and I rewrote it using Hemingway, and it was a really very interesting example. So here is the original sentence. It says, of course, we have a lot of best practices, and then it has a number of very long sentences. So what Hemingway does is it gives you sort of a grade on the sentences. Now, this is just one paragraph, and it was part of a number of paragraphs that were also terrible, but In terms of readability, the concepts were good and they were grammatically correct, but readability-wise, they were challenged. And the biggest challenge was length of sentences. I love doing long sentences, and so Hemingway has been great to help me shorten my sentences. Now, one of the things Hemingway gives you is a grade, a readability based on sort of grade level. And it turns out that lower is better to a certain point. Grade 6 to grade 9 is actually really makes most people find writing that at grade level 6 to 9 much more engaging. Almost nobody finds writing at grade level 12 that engaging. And I've seen this in the results on my blog. Since I've started paying attention to readability, I've made the readability, I've made it more like grade 6 to 9, and I get more readers and more comments and things. So it has worked out for me, and I know it's worked out for other folks as well. So looking at the Hemingway, it's reported that there's an adverb in there. There's a passive voice. You can see the green, been delivered. But the big problem is that the 3 of the 4 sentences are very hard to read, and typically this is because they're so long. So we know that requirements are a best practice, but we also know that a lot of successful products have been delivered without much in the way of requirements. So that's like 22 words or something. We know that prototyping is a great way to converge on a product design, but there are lots of products that don't have much design, that do okay, and lots of beautiful products that sink like cannonballs. So long sentences. So what I did was simply do this. I shortened the first sentence, that first long sentence. I turned it into 2 sentences. We have a lot of best practices. Requirements are a best practice, but many successful products have never had much in the way of requirements. That actually, it just sounds a lot better. It's kind of funny. It's the same exact words, except I took, instead of using a comma after best practices, I used a period. I still started a sentence with but, which is sort of not considered grammatically a good style, but it really works in this particular sentence because of the way that it makes it sound more human. So in some sense, I was sort of using that comma in a way to sound conversational, but the period actually works better in writing. So then I can do, it also significantly dropped the grade level, as you can see. It's a grade 9. So now I've got a green. Now, I just did the same basic thing on the next 2 sentences. In fact, the same structure. So there's now this nice structure that's repeating. Before it had a structure that repeated, but it was in these really long sentences. But now it's got a structure that repeats in shorter sentences. Now it's grade level 6, which is quite good. I took out I rewrote the sentence that had the passive voice in it, and now I'm at grade 6. I've got a really good score over on the right-hand side in terms of all those uses. And that paragraph is actually much better, and that's the paragraph that's now on the blog. So it used to be the old paragraph, and then I rewrote the sentence, and it's now the new paragraph. So that is an example of using Hemingway to improve readability, and it's a very simple set of rules. And once you have used Hemingway a little bit to do this, you can actually just start noticing that yourself. Oh, I've got a really long sentence here. There are quite a lot of readability tools. Even, I believe Microsoft Word has a readability tool in it. And then there's some online tools. There's Hemingway, of course. I think I actually purchased Hemingway. It wasn't very expensive, but there's also an online version that I think is free. There is, if you are doing blogging, WordPress has a plugin called the Yoast SEO plugin. It's for search engine optimization, but it also has a readability component. So there's a lot of ways to get help with this readability stuff. But Hemingway is a very nice and a really nice little interaction for doing that. Persuasive writing, obviously a really important part of what we do is we try to sell people on our ideas. We sell developers on our ideas. We sell executives on our ideas because we want them to fund stuff. We sell, obviously, our customers on our ideas and on our product because we want them to buy our product. And so there's all these different things that we do. Now, our readers are humans, all those people that I talked about, engineers, executives, customers. Much as you may be surprised to hear this, they're all human beings. And human beings, with very rare exceptions, are engaged by stories and by conversational writing. And so those are 2 of the fundamental touchstones of being persuasive when you write. Now, why do you need to do this? Why do you need to be persuasive, and why should you worry about this? A lot of us as technologists think, well, let me just give people the facts and give them accurate information about the product, and they're going to be able to make a good decision. Well, the reality is that that's not how people actually make decisions. If you do any research or look into the way that people make decisions, even the most rational of us, typically we use our rationality to justify the decisions that we make at a more emotional level. This is just reality, even for us homo logicus type people. And so we have to then be always worried about persuasion. And it doesn't matter what people say about what they're using, how they're making decisions. The fact is that they're using a lot of emotional and sort of human-based, back of the brain kind of thinking in order to make their decisions. And as I say, they do want to justify their decisions using logic, but they do that post-decision. So that's the reason we have to do that. So our writing has to be both logically consistent and accurate, but it also has to be emotionally persuasive. What does persuasive writing look like? Well, here's some of the things. It's conversational. It's like your writing is like having a conversation with the other person. And so this means things like using you instead of I or us. So instead of saying, well, here's an example of how our product does X. You might use something along the lines of, here's an example of how our product will do X for you. That's a passive voice, but it's not bad. Or, oh, do you have this problem X? Let me show you how our product addresses that. Or, so asking questions is another kind of thing you can do. Persuasive writing also has lots of examples and analogies and stories. And I've talked in this series about stories, and I actually have a deck now that I could share. Maybe I'll do that in a future Facebook Live. But the rough and very usable format for stories is there was a problem or an unmet objective, there was a solution or a struggle to find a solution, there were some results or some kind of transformation, right? My customer had a problem they couldn't solve. They looked around for all kinds of solutions. They finally found ours, and as a result, they have solved their problem and they have transformed, and they now got a raise or whatever. So using that story structure it turns out to be very persuasive. There's other story structures, but this is the easiest one, I think, to make use of on a regular basis. There's also, as I said, this conversational writing idea. One good way to find out how your writing sounds, whether it's sort of conversational, is to read it out loud. And sort of ask yourself as you listen to yourself speak, would you speak like that? Does it sound like you? And if not, you should change it to sound like how you speak. Use the words that you use when you speak. Use the kinds of phraseology that you might use when you speak. Another alternative, and this is something I often do, is to write by talking. And that is to say, I have a topic that I want to write about, and so I'll just start talking about that topic as though maybe I was telling a colleague about it, or I was telling a customer, or I was telling my wife. Actually, I use my wife a lot for this kind of thing. And then I listen to what's coming out of my mouth, and I write it down, or maybe I record it and then transcribe it. Another thing you can do, and I've done this a lot, is you write like it's a conversation. So you might start out your writing by writing down a question. Why is this product so excellent for XYZ? And then you'd start writing out your answer as though you were saying it out loud. And I find that that's a great way to have to create conversational kind of writing as well. Because if you think about how a conversation can go, somebody says something, somebody responds to that, or somebody asks a question, somebody answers the question. Somebody asks a question, somebody answers a question, then they ask for clarification, and then you provide clarification. And so that's how conversations work, and you can sort of mimic that in your writing. Now, does the final piece come out like that, like a conversation? Not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily have question and answer form, but what this does is it helps you to put your ideas into words that sound conversational, and then you can do editing to make it sound, to make it more appropriate for whatever the written outcome is going to be. Now, of course, a lot of times what your written outcome is actually going to be a set of slides like this, and then you're going to talk over them. So that's a conversation already. But that's the type of thing where you'd be prepping or maybe writing a video script or making a presentation script. And you want those to be conversational. Even in some sense, it's even more important than the writing being conversational, because you're actually talking out loud if you're doing a presentation. So you need that to not sound like an academic thing. You need that to sound like a human being. There's lots of other techniques for persuasion. I like really using real quotes from real people. I have this problem and the product solved the problem. You can also use made up quotes, but you have to be kind of careful about that from an ethical standpoint. And there's reasons that you might use made up quotes. It might be hard to get the real quotes from the real people, but if people often don't say things quite the way you want them. And so a lot of times you will have a customer tell you something, and then you'll sort of make a version of that and use that as the quote. Now, you may not be able to get permission to use the customer's real words or real name or real company. And that's always an opportunity to sort of say, well, we have customers that say XYZ. Even if you don't have any customer that literally said those words in that order, but they definitely said things that had the same meaning as XYZ. That's, to me, I think if you're an ethical person, you will know where the boundaries are on this, right? You don't want to lie, you don't want to mislead, but if you have customers that are achieving something and have told you that they are, you are, I believe, allowed to create a quote that presents that in a somewhat polished way. Okay. So those are some things on persuasion, very powerful. Again, when we get to the course, I expect to put some of these into form of exercise and some practice and some examples on things we can fix and things like that. And I would love to get your feedback and thoughts on what you think of this information so far, whether you think it's valuable, what you would change, what additional questions you have, what you'd like me to answer that I haven't yet answered. If this course were available, whether you might find it worthwhile to go or recommend that your colleagues or something, that I would love to get your feedback on that. Or if people really like this stuff, I can go on with more on persuasion and writing techniques and things like that. Because I think this is very interesting and it's very valuable. And I haven't even really gotten into some of the things about how do you get started writing if you have a writer's block. And I have some useful advice for that, at least things that work for me. Well, thanks for watching this video. In the comments, please tell me what you found most interesting. And if you'd like, let me know what your next action steps will be based on what I just talked about. I read all the comments and I'm looking forward to reading and responding to yours. If you want to see more in this series, subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is at youtube.com/c/The Secret Product Manager Handbook. And if you like the video, please click the like button. That will help more people discover it. Also, please feel free to share. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel. You can find links to other videos as well as my book and my blog down below. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you can get a link to the announcement list for the course that I'm working on about product management writing. And until next time, this is Nils Davis for the Secret Product Manager Handbook.